Lecture 8. I'm going to share the screen here, get the presentation going. And this is the first of a multi-part series on the media and its impact on politics. We're down to 55 days before the election, which means it's coming very, very quickly. People have already received ballots in North Carolina and can start voting now, and other early voting states are already accepting mail-in ballots and accepting absentee ballots. So this election's happening really fast. There will be more absentee and mail-in ballots in this election than in all the elections we've ever had combined. It will be just an amazing thing because of the COVID crisis. Okay, so this theme is the president and his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad year. This has not been a good year to be president, with lots of obstacles, lots of things happening all over the country, as you know. Now, last week's little assignment was to take a look at the 13 factors outlined by Alan J. Lichtman, and if you get 8 of the 13 keys, then as the incumbent, you're going to win. And he's never been wrong. He's predicted every election since 1984, and we did this assignment 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, and let's see how you guys did. Well, you don't have him winning. It's close, but you've given him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then narrowly missing on this one. He needed 32 votes by the time we tabulated, and narrowly missing on this one. It was like the foreign military decision and the challenger charisma. So some of you were willing to give Mr. Biden some charisma points, I suppose. So what did Lichtman predict? Well, he, in a month ago, did an interview where he said, I've done my prediction, here it is. And he usually does it about 100 days out from the election. And he gave 6 as well. So you have just matched the great guru of predictions when it comes to the presidential elections. Now, who knows what that means? I mean, this could all go sideways in a hurry, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a lot of fun. But it's important to know that there's lots to think about when it comes to re-electing a president. It's not just a simple process. It's a roller coaster. And this roller coaster this year has been as wild and crazy as any I've ever seen, with the COVID challenge, climate change, civil rights, the economy, and then Mr. Trump made mail-in voting a big issue, disparaging the count already, that if it's not counted on election day, it doesn't count. That's not true. They get a month to count. Voter suppression becomes an issue. And we've heard about more foreign intervention in this election cycle that happened 4 years ago, especially from Russia. All right, now, the other thing, though, is the freedom of the press. The press has not been kind to President Trump, but President Trump, in fairness, has not been kind to the press. And so we need to know a few terms to start out with. Okay, let's start out with this term, allegedly or reportedly. Now, when reporters report something that they've learned about, they need multiple sources, right? And then when they write it, if it hasn't been totally proven, like in a court, then they'll use the words allegedly or reportedly, okay? So it's important to know those words, and when you hear them in conversation, understand what they mean. It's something that's been stated but not necessarily confirmed. For example, a person who's been arrested for a crime who has not yet been through the process of trial. The story has not been, and the key word here is corroborated. Now, what does corroboration mean? Corroboration is evidence or corroboration that supports a story that is already supported by the initial evidence, therefore confirming the original story. So a story comes out, it's alleged, other news agencies, other people corroborate the story. They do their own independent investigation of it and find it to be true. It's a little like the scientific method. You run an experiment, but then other people have to run that same experiment before it becomes valid. All right, now, journalists use anonymous sources. What does that mean? Well, anonymous means you don't say in the article or in the news piece who that person is. Some people are speaking off the record. They don't want their names to be used, but they want the reporter to know some information. Why would journalists use anonymous sources? Well, for access. Some sources refuse to share stories without the shield of anonymity. Basically, that might be some government officials that, if they were found out, would be fired or meet severe reprimands, but they feel that there's something that needs to be said. Protection from reprisal or punishment. That's another reason to leave your name out of it. Other sources, it could be for illegal activity. So somebody's committing a crime, but you don't want to self-incriminate because you might be swept up in the criminal activity. And then finally, classified information. Sources that are classified information that are leaked to the press. Someone feels like they have a need to share classified information and do it anyway. And so, yeah, this is often, a crime, but they leak it to the press. Now, the press can publish it because we have a free press. The person leaking the classified information may be in some trouble. All right, well, every 4 years for the last 12 years, we've done tipping point. Is there a moment in this election where we see a tipping point for one candidate or the other? And so far, this election has been extremely static. Now, let's kind of take a look at what a tipping point can be. So basically, if you're trying to push something up the mountain, I'll use this next picture, like Sisyphus here, the famous Greek myth, you put all your energy and you constantly rolling it up. And that's what a campaign is like. You're pushing up, going against all the forces against you. And to get to the top and to actually win is really a tough thing. And so the idea is you push until finally you get a snowball effect where maybe there's a tipping point where your candidate breaks and starts running ahead. Most elections are like that. Most elections, there's a tipping point. It's very rarely that you don't see one. All right, so we're looking at the Obama bump that we talked about last time. When we take a look at this, Mr. Obama basically came up from 42 to 52% in the final days leading up to the election. Now, that's a very healthy bump, and he was able to win over a very impressive Mitt Romney by a pretty sizable margin in today's politics. He got 51% of the vote. He's the only president to get 51% plus in back-to-back elections since Dwight D. Eisenhower in the 1950s. But Romney was a great candidate, and in the first debate, he cleaned Obama's clock. It was wow, and it looked for a bit like Romney had a real shot. But in the second and third debate, Obama came back strong, and that's when the numbers started to move. People were comfortable with Obama, and you see this bump after that second debate. All right, well, debates can make a difference, and we have a debate coming up, of course, at the end of this month, which we'll need to make time for in your schedule. This election, though, has been really static. It's kind of stayed close to the same for a long time. Here was September 7th, right here. You'll notice that we have a lot of gray states still, that we call them purple states. And then we have, of course, some blue and some red, but it doesn't seem to be moving one way or the other very fast. Now, Mr. Trump is looking for a bounce. He didn't really get it from his convention, got a little bounce, but it flattened out quickly, as you can see. So he's basically going from about 43%. How does he get to 50 to 51%? So there's only three ways this can go. He can get an Obama-like bounce, or he can continue to tighten the election and still lose, or he could drop precipitously. So one of those three options is likely, right? Well, obviously. Now, here's where it stands as of Monday. Biden, national polls 50 to 43, but remember, national polls don't count because we don't vote as a nation. Instead, you have to look at these state polls to see who's going to get the lead in the Electoral College. For example, you see Arizona here. Well, Arizona is now a little bit more comfortable into the Biden camp. Wisconsin, you see here, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania may be the tipping point state this year, where it's the state that puts a candidate over the top. How popular is the president? These numbers have flattened out too. He made a comeback right around the convention time and got to his traditional 43, but this is just kind of flattened out. All right, well, now we need to talk about media bias and the fourth estate. And here's the situation. The media really drives elections. They run coverage wall to wall, day after day after day. And they're major influencers of American public opinion. Now, you remember the States General where we talked about left, right, and center? Where we talked about how the first estate was the church, the second estate was the nobility, and the third estate was everyone else. Well, we have coined a phrase called the fourth estate. And the fourth estate is the free press. And that was something, of course, the French, probably as much as any country in the world, promoted and made happen in their country. And, of course, we benefited from that. All right, now, let's start with the famous quote. "Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper." Well, give you a moment to think about that. But that was Thomas Jefferson who said that. Now, the problem with this quote is it's taken out of context. The full context of the quote is something like this. Here's what he said. "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." So even though what we see often in the media may be distorted or may not be accurate or we just may not like it, it's better to have a competition of ideas than it is to have, like they do in Russia and other places, North Korea, whatever, one state media in China that tells everybody what to believe, that there's no alternative viewpoints, right? So that's kind of important. Now, we talk about Mr. Trump's attack on the media. Mr. Trump has spent the last 4 years attacking the media. Here's one of his more famous tweets. "The fake news media, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC, CBS, CNN, is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people." So these are our most illustrious news agencies and news organizations, and he's calling it the enemy of the people. And anytime a story comes out that is negative on him, he calls it a hoax or as fake news. And so it's become kind of synonymous with Mr. Trump's campaign, that if bad news comes out, it's called a hoax or a fake news. But the thing is, it's not that simple, right? Basically, Jefferson gave us a truthometer, right? And this truth meter gives us 4 possibilities, right, that we need to consider. And that's what you're going to do in your activity. We're going to give you a story, a bombshell story that was released in the Atlantic, and we're going to have you analyze that, try to find some sources of your own, and decide whether the story is a lie. Is it a hoax or fake news? Is it possible? It is possible, but seems unlikely. Or is it plausible? Plausibility means it is reasonable to believe, very likely or probable, right? So plausible, right? Or a fact, it's true. It's good, well-sourced journalism. Okay, so there's your meter. There's your 4 elements that you'll see in the study guide that you'll need to respond to on this story. Now, the Free Press has not, like I said, been very supportive, frankly, of Mr. Trump throughout his presidency. One station has been Fox News, which is important to know. We'll talk more about that in next time. But on the impact of the election, we just so far haven't seen that much change in Mr. Trump's support, even though bombshell books like this come out, Mary Trump, Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. It's quite a read. It's a psychological view of the president, but they were able to just whisk it away. It just didn't seem to have the impact. But is that going to continue with 3 books that are coming out between now and the election? The first is called Compromised, and it's the Counterintelligence and the Threat of Donald J. Trump by Peter Strzok. Now, who is he? Peter Strzok. He is the former chief of counterespionage for the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he paints a picture that Mr. Trump is just a puppet of Putin. In fact, many European leaders have called Mr. Trump Putin's poodle, it's kind of in a derogatory way. So will this book may have an impact? I don't know. But the next book might. It's called Disloyal, the true story of the former personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump, Michael Cohen, who went to jail for 3.5 years for doing some things that he was asked to by Donald J. Trump. And this book was written in jail while he was serving time, and they tried to block it and this kind of thing in court, and it didn't work. The judge said, "I'm sorry, but this is freedom of speech here, And so he is now, because of COVID, still serving time in his home, and he finishes this book, and it should be coming out really soon. And he says there's lots of things that he knows because there's lots of things that happened that he was part of, that he was a criminal, admitted criminal, felony, had 12 felony convictions when he went to jail. And he's saying, I was working for someone, and you should know the story. Obviously, this one's going to be very interesting. Now, the next one is Bob Woodward's book. Now, who's Bob Woodward? Bob Woodward is releasing a book right now called Rage on the president's last couple of years in office. And Bob Woodward is this man right here, and here's Carl Bernstein. And the reason Woodward is important, and the reason his books are important, is he spent pretty much the last 20 years doing the first draft of history for each president. I mean, he has written so many important books about different presidents, during this era, and starting back with Nixon. And the reason these two are important, is they're probably the most important reporters that America's ever produced. They were the ones that broke the Watergate scandal. They worked for the Washington Post, relying heavily on an anonymous source called Deep Throat. They just gave it that fake name there. But that was a real person, and basically they got information from this person and other people. They corroborated the evidence, and they broke the Watergate story. And it was all about a break-in of the Democratic headquarters and the Watergate Hotel, and it led to President Nixon's resignation. That is the power of the press. It led to the resignation of Nixon, and under the 25th Amendment, Gerald R. Ford became President of the United States. And of course, we learned that no man should be above the law, not even the president, right? Nixon broke many laws. There's no doubt about it. All right, well, who was Deep Throat? Well, decades later, and I'm talking decades later, the person who was Deep Throat, who was the informant, who was the anonymous source, turned out to be the deputy director of the FBI, and his name is Mark Felt. And he passed away. He was getting Alzheimer's, and before he passed into that space, that sad space of Alzheimer's, he said, I want people to know now that you guys weren't just making this up. In terms of your sources, you had a good source, and you had the deputy director of the FBI. So anonymous sources brought down Nixon. Now, here's the story that you need to analyze, right? So here we go. About Thursday, we were just leaving school, and this article broke in the Atlantic magazine, which is really kind of an important one on the East Coast. Now, they've done other articles, The Mind of Donald Trump. Here's one cover. Now, Mr. Trump, as soon as the article came out, attacked it. The Atlantic magazine is dying, like most magazines, so they make up a fake story in order to gain some relevance. A story already refuted, but this is what we are up against. Just like the fake dossier. You fight, and then people realize it was a total fraud. All right, well, wow, that's quite a reaction, right? From the president. Well, what's the story? Here's the story. Mr. Trump is slipping a little bit among military people. Now, Republican presidents since Reagan have pretty much counted on the military and veteran vote as being in their corner, in their camp. So, for example, we go back to 2016. We see that Donald Trump won 61% of the veterans. And among active duty soldiers, Mr. Trump won, I think it was higher than that, actually. This was a poll before the election. But he made it broken 50. And Clinton hardly did anything. There was a third-party candidate who did better. So, yeah, you can count on the vote of the active duty military, usually, if you're a Republican. But with the Black Lives Matter protest happening in the streets of D.C. near a park called Lafayette Park, here's a picture of it. It's a park honoring both the Marquis de Lafayette and Andrew Jackson. Beautiful park, but it's a place that people will go to protest because it's as close as you can get to the White House, and with your signs and whatever, and still be comfortably safe for the president and his family. And it's widely been used. Well, what happened was on this particular day, June 1st, may have been a bit of a tipping point in the military vote. In June 1st, the president announced he had the law and order campaign was about to start, and he had members of the National Guard actually clear Lafayette Square with tear gas and maybe rubber bullets was one rumor, but tear gas for sure. You can see it there. And then he marched from the White House down the street through Lafayette Park to a famous church, St. John's Church. And he held up a Bible, and it became a photo opportunity. And he's basically showing, how he's going to maintain peace during all these protests. All right, but the problem with that is it didn't go over well. And Mark Milley, here is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he's basically in charge of our military, was in his basically combat uniform, and he was asked to kind of join the little parade going across from the White House through Lafayette Park. And then he realized, wait a minute, this is a political event, and he didn't get in the final photo. He stayed out of that, fortunately for him. But the military does not get involved in political campaigns. And so a few days later, Mark Milley, the like I said, top general right now running America's military, apologized to the troops and apologized to everybody for being in a situation where it looked like he was supporting a political campaign. Here's his actual apology. Okay, so Joint Chiefs Chair apologizes for participating in Trump's photo op. This is from Axios. And here's his statement to the troops after.
As senior leaders, everything you do will be closely watched. And I am not immune. As many of you saw the result of the photograph of me at Lafayette Square last week, that sparked a national debate about the role of the military in civil society. I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it. We who wear the cloth of our nation come from the people of our nation. And we must hold dear the principle of an apolitical military that is so deeply rooted in the very essence of our republic.
All right, well, a pretty strong statement, and he's right. The military should not be involved in politics, and maybe that was a point, I don't know, but in a survey this August, just recently released actually, Mr. Trump was trailing Mr. Biden, and the third-party candidate still does pretty well among active duty soldiers. So this is kind of where it stood, and then we get to the story of the Belleau Wood. This is a place in France. It was along the lines between the German troops and the French, British, and American troops. America had just entered the war. We just had our first tens of thousands of soldiers put into the front lines. We had hundreds of thousands that were to follow. But at that particular moment, the Germans decided to push for an all-out victory and to end the war before the rest of the Americans could arrive. And they hit the line like you wouldn't believe. And the American Marines held the line. It'd be right down here. Here's the Belleau Wood. As the Germans advanced from the old line to here, it was quite a push. They were within 40 miles of Paris. And if they'd taken Paris, they could have won the war. But we lost 1,811 Marines fighting in the Great War and to stopping them. And we were part of a massive effort to stop the Germans. And this was one of the greatest moments in Marine Corps history. Well, it's honored in these photographs where this one drawing was actually a French drawing talking about the courage of the American troops. It was hand-to-hand combat. It was in a rough situation, about as tough a fighting as you could possibly imagine. Now remember, American troops were new at this, and so to have excelled and done so well was seen as quite a cool thing. Now, today, there's a cemetery that has been given, this portion of it anyway, by the country of France to the United States for those brave soldiers that fought that day. And we just had, not too long ago, the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the armistice. That's the day, November 11th, where the Great War, World War I, ended. And all the world leaders went to France, And they all, on the same day, on Armistice Day, went out to their national cemeteries that were in France. There was a British cemetery, there was a French one, obviously, Canadian and American, and so on, and German as well. And so what happened is they planned for months to have the president go to the Belleau Wood to commemorate this great battle, and he didn't go. And he claimed that it was the weather, and he claimed it was raining and that the helicopter couldn't fly there, but every other world leader got in their limousines and drove there, right? And he didn't. And it was kind of odd at the time. I mean, here's the BBC News, it's British Broadcasting News, and so, yeah, everybody's noticed that, why would you not go to this cemetery? And apparently, according to the reporting in the Atlantic magazine, right, allegedly, Mr. Trump, remember he used the word allegedly here, Americans who died in war are losers and suckers, and he said that, according to these anonymous sources. Trump disparaged U.S. war dead as losers and suckers. Here's the Associated Press. There's the Atlantic. Followed up. These other organizations followed up, did their own reporting, and corroborated the story. Trump faces uproar over reported remarks disparaging fallen soldiers. New York Times, Washington Post. Trump said U.S. soldiers injured and killed in war were losers. Magazine reports. ABC, NBC, CBS News all corroborated the story. They found interviews with people that said, yeah, it happened. The White House was quick to say it didn't, and then to talk about Mr. Trump's record in terms of the military. And this is a rather glowing tweet by one of his assistants there. And then the Trump tweet that I read to you sooner, or read you previously. The Atlantic magazine is dying. Like most magazines, they make up a fake story in order to gain some relevance. Story already refuted, but this is what they are up against. What we are up against, just like the fake dossier. You fight and fight, and then people realize it was a total fraud. Well, is it? That's the question. And this is a bombshell. This is one of those things where, wow, this is a political cartoon that was drawn rather quickly. There have been ads already, political ads come up, and even in the military.com website, which is reports on military news, the quote found its way in there. And some people have already reacted to this. There's a tweet here from this man who said, it's 2:45 a.m., and the retired Marine who lives just behind me took his Trump sign down, walked into the street, and threw it in the garbage. Will this be a tipping point? I don't know. But when we talk about corroboration, remember I told you that the most President Trump-friendly network on the cable news networks is Fox News. Well, Jennifer Griffin of Fox News did her own independent corroboration of the story, and here's what she had to say.
More now on that new report out of the Atlantic magazine claiming President Trump called America's fallen service members suckers and losers. The president denying that report vehemently. Top Pentagon officials are weighing in. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin has more on that. Jennifer.
John, I've spoken with two senior U.S. officials who were on the trip to France who confirmed to me key details in the Atlantic article and the quotes attributed to the president. My source, a former Trump administration official, told me when the president spoke about the Vietnam War, he said it was a stupid war. Anyone who went was a sucker. The president would say about American veterans, what's in it for them? They don't make any money. The source said it was a character flaw of the president. He could not understand why someone would die for their country. Not worth it. Regarding the French trip to mark the end of World War I, according to this former official, the president was not in a good mood. French President Macron had said something that made him mad. He questioned why he had to go to two cemeteries. Why do I have to do two? His staff explained he could cancel, but he was warned, they, the press, are going to kill you for this. The president was mad as a hornet when they did, according to this source. When asked if the president could have driven to the Aisne-Marne cemetery, this former official said confidently that there was not a security reason not to drive to the cemetery, which was about 40 miles from Paris. Quote, the president drives a lot. The other world leaders drove to the cemeteries. He just didn't want to go. Regarding the president's July 4th military parade planning, during a planning session at the White House after seeing the Bastille Day parade in 2017, President Trump said regarding the inclusion of wounded guys, quote, that's not a good look. Americans don't like that. Regarding Senator McCain, the president, according to this source, just hated John McCain. He always asked, why do you see him as a hero? Two sources confirmed the president did not want the flags lowered after McCain died, but others in the White House ordered them at half-mast. There was a standoff, and then the president relented. Meantime, Defense Secretary Mark Esper just issued a statement praising the president. Quote, President Trump has the highest respect and admiration for our nation's military members, veterans, and families. That is why he has fought for greater pay and more funding for our armed forces.
All right, well, there you have it. And I play that only because Fox News is the most President Trump friendly network out there. They've been very supportive, but they corroborated the story and for their own station. And apparently also, according to the Atlantic, described former President George H.W. Bush, who was, by the way, the youngest pilot in the Pacific during World War II, was a Navy pilot. He was shot down at 58 combat missions. He was shot down on one of them, and Bush called him a loser because his plane got shot down. Here he is being rescued at sea, very dramatic, floating, barely hanging on, and they bring him up and bring him on deck and save his life from a submarine. All right, well, now John McCain's name came up. Now, he's a very famous senator, one of the most important ones, and Mr. Trump then tweeted on September 3rd, it's just happened, I never called John McCain a loser. Well, we actually have that on tape, so if we want to play that, this is a...
But referring to people as rapists, referring to John McCain, a war hero, 5.5 years as a POW, and you call him a dummy. Is that appropriate in running for president?
Okay, you got to let me speak, though, Frank, because you interrupt all the time, okay? So, no, I know him too well. That's the problem. Let's take John McCain. I'm in Phoenix. We have a meeting that is going to have 500 people at the Biltmore Hotel. We get a call from the hotel. It's turmoil. Thousands and thousands of people are showing up. 3-4 days before, they're pitching tents on the hotel grass. The hotel says, we can't handle it. It's going to destroy the hotel. We move it to the convention center. We have 15,000 people. The biggest one ever. Bigger than Bernie Sanders, bigger than 15,000 people showed up to hear me speak. Bigger than anybody. And everybody knows it. A beautiful day with incredible people that were wonderful, great Americans, I will tell you. John McCain goes, oh boy, Trump makes my life difficult. He had 15,000 crazies show up, crazies. He called them all crazy. I said, they weren't crazy. They were great Americans. These people, if you would have seen these people, I know what a crazy is. I know all about crazies. These weren't crazy. So he insulted me, and he insulted everybody in that room. And I said, somebody should run against John McCain, who has been, in my opinion, not so hot. And I supported him. I supported him for president. I raised $1 million for him. It's a lot of money. I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that, because I don't like losers. But Frank, let me...
Okay, so we played the full context of the speech, but he actually did make the statement. But there's more to the story, and oftentimes these little segments are taken out, like he called him a loser. Yes, but it was within the context of a broader story. So you can look at that a lot of different ways and analyze it however you wish. But nevertheless, this is not a true statement. And McCain, of course, responded to him. But who's McCain? He was the nominee of the Republican Party for president that ran against Barack Obama in 2008. Here he is with Mitt Romney, who ran against Obama in 2012. Okay, so here's John McCain as a fighter pilot, Navy pilot, just like George H.W. Bush, fighter pilot, and he was dropping ordnance over North Vietnam. He was in the North Vietnamese fight, and he got shot down. and he was barely rescued. He landed his plane in a lake. He was beaten. He was tortured. He was thrown in a place called the Hanoi Hilton for 5.5 years. And his service is just remarkable. He's a hero to everybody, whether you were for the Vietnam War or against the Vietnam War, it didn't matter. John McCain stood out as a great hero. And the thing is, this Hanoi Hilton, as it's called, was just the name they gave jokingly to this very, very terrible place to be. Now, John McCain's father was the admiral overseeing the entire Pacific Fleet. He was as high up in the Navy as you can get. And the North Vietnamese decided, well, let's use this as a propaganda tool. Let's offer to release John McCain to his father because his father's so prominent. Well, John McCain refused to go. He said, I will not go while any of the airmen who got here before me to this terrible place, this Hanoi Hilton, have been released first. And so he spent more years in jail. Here he is with Ronald Reagan, and he's one of the truly great leaders in our country. But of course, he and President Trump just simply don't get along. All right, well, this Atlantic article's been huge, and of course, you know that Vice President Biden is not going to sit on it. Here is his comments on, I believe, Friday of last week.
A diagnosis
We'll
of
have to
metastatic breast
wait for
cancer
the ad.
can
I'm sorry.
overwhelm you with
We'll
thoughts.
just,
Yet also leave you at a loss for words. Take a deep breath. Here, find your
Sorry about this ad, guys.
NBCvoice.com.
Don't have a commercial-free option here. Okay,
Before
here we
begin,
go.
I want to speak a little bit to what they talked about and the revelations about President Trump's disregard for our military and our veterans. And quite frankly, if what is written in the Atlantic is true, it's disgusting. And it affirms what most of us believe to be true. That Donald Trump is not fit to be the job of president, to be the commander-in-chief. The president reportedly said, and I emphasize reportedly said, that those who sign up to serve instead of doing something more lucrative are suckers. Let me be real clear. When my son was an assistant U.S. attorney and he volunteered to go to Kosovo while the war was going on as a civilian, he wasn't a sucker. When my son volunteered and joined the United States military as the Attorney General and went to Iraq for a year, won the Bronze Star and other commendations, he wasn't a sucker. The servicemen and women he served with, particularly those who did not come home, were not losers. If these statements are true, the president should humbly apologize to every Gold Star mother and father and every Blue Star family that he's denigrated and insulted. Who the heck does he think he is? Is it true? Well, we've heard from his own mouth his characterizations of an American hero, John McCain, as a loser in 2015. Donald Trump said he was not a war hero. I like people who weren't captured. Well, good for him. And his dismissal of the traumatic brain injuries suffered by troops serving in Iraq as mere headaches not too long ago. He stood by, failing to take action or even raise the issue with Vladimir Putin, while the Kremlin puts bounties on the heads of American troops in Afghanistan. It's a sacred duty. And you're tired of hearing me say this. Shows you've been covering me for years. No. I get in trouble for saying, but I'm going to say it again. We have many obligations as a government. We only have one truly sacred obligation. Equip and support those who we send into harm's way, care for their families while they're gone, and care for them when they are home. That's the only truly sacred obligation a government has. Duty, honor, country. These are values that drive our service members. It's an all-voluntary outfit. President Trump has demonstrated he has no sense of service, no loyalty to any cause other than himself. If I have the honor of being the next commander-in-chief, I will ensure that our American heroes know I'll have their backs, honor their sacrifice, and those who've been injured will be in military parades.
Well, you get the idea. So, does this story, released by The Atlantic, it hit like a bombshell, corroborated even by Fox News, the most pro-Trump channel. Is it true or not? Well, you get to make that judgment. And so we're going to go to the website here. I hope I got this all up for you. Poli-sci page. And there's going to be this on Media Bias Part 8A, and there'll be a short answer essay, and you'll make some judgments. Okay, so we're going to use Jefferson's scale. Make sure you get your name and class period in there. Is it a lie, this story from The Atlantic? Is it possible, but unlikely? Is it plausible, likely believable? Or is it fact? Is it true, based on well-sourced journalism? Now, pick one and then write an essay. Now, I would hope you'd go out and learn more and get backup for your opinion. Again, all opinions matter. All ideas are respected. We won't know the full story here or not for years probably. But it's impacting this election right now. And so every year we try to pick a story like this, and we analyze it, and we think, is it a tipping point? Is it going to move the election, what they call move the needle one way or the other? And we'll see. We've had a very static election. Is something like this the thing that makes the difference? So I hope you'll enjoy the assignment. I really want you to think through this one and just use your best research and opinions on this rather short essay, but I can't wait to read them. And I really, like I said, respect whatever side you would take on this, and I think it's always interesting and informative for me to hear what you have to say. All right, you guys, that's it for today.